Hello friends, welcome back to Spiritism for All, and today we continue to study the book Behind the Scenes of Obsession, and the chapter is The Unexpected Solution. The spiritual author is Manoel Philomeno de Miranda, and the medium is Divaldo Franco. After 15 days of hospitalization at the Hospital do Pronto Socorro, Mr. Mateus was taken home with expressive signs of brief organic recovery. Visiting him at the first opportunity with Petitinga, we listened to the narrative of the story of the serious crime of which he had become a victim, and it impressed us to observe the charge of hatred accumulated in the mind that was boiling, ready to explode with revolt and restlessness. Mr. Mateus was a man of almost 60 years, sanguine, willful. Disturbed in himself, he went through carnal existence, jumping from levity to levity, often forgetting the duties of husband and father, fascinated by the green cloth in which he ventured, throwing away the meager resources that, if applied at home, would be of high value if they were for the good of the family consisting of 6 daughters. On the other hand, Dona Rosa shared her time between domestic duties and sewing until late at night to meet with the effort of some of her daughters the domestic needs. Irreligious by a rebellious temper, he had always neglected spiritual duties to himself. In days gone by, he had been an excellent artist, now receiving a meager pension from the retirement insurance to which he had joined earlier, having been deemed unfit to pursue the profession. As the decrepitude of forces approached and fear of discarnation, he became more sour, almost unbearable. Due to Mariana's return to home, and impressed by Petitinga's information and clarifications about obsession, and the care that we must all impose to avoid its unfortunate plots, he seemed to change his behavior for a few days. Later, as if he had become hallucinated, he gave himself up to excesses, and not infrequently stirred up the like-minded discarnate ones. He threatened to expel his selfless wife and his daughters from home when he needed money for his adventures. The domestic environment with his presence turned to be pestilential by the abundant fluidic emanations that roamed disorderly there. Petitinga, pleasant and courteous, after listening to the promises of vengeance made by the unfortunate victim, told him about the experience of Jesus Christ and his lessons, without immediately achieving any result. With a mind addicted to long years of continuous imbalances, Dona Rosa's husband tuned with the band of moral debauchery and, allowing the partnership with his former partners, presented himself irreducible in his points of view, in his conduct and in his attitudes. He claimed to accept the Spiritist treatments, although it were only to free him more easily from his bed, in order to allow him to immediately return to the places of his humiliation, to restore the purity of his honor. Solicitous and using the opportunity, the zealous friend invited us to pray, and in heartfelt peroration he exhorted the divine resources for that family, but especially for the sick husband, asking for the interference of the divine physician, who never lacks, in order that the home of Soares be not dragged into more serious drama and unpredictable consequences. The words, anointed with emotion, vibrated sweetly in the simple room like delicate music, enveloping us in consoling hope. The natural, spontaneous attunement with the high spheres became immediate, and Saturnino, the selfless mentor, taking the mental command of truth, delivered an expressive and valuable dissertation on the duties of forgiveness as a behavioral normative for one's own happiness. Solicitos, he said, happy are those who forgive, he enunciated consciously, because they confer peace on themselves and in turn release those who have offended them from that, thus handing them over the sovereign laws in charge of the evolution of man. Those who forgive and help get even greater reward because they support the wicked and overcome them with the light of mercy. However, those who preserve their grievances become intoxicated, poisoned, causing serious illnesses that are unleashed rigorously, which transform into long-time suffering, whose responsible ones, however, are those who cultivate unspeakable thoughts and delight in the seeding of anger and hatred, absorbing the very toxic emanation of the misaligned mind. And those who fight back bad for bad, aggression for aggression, these are already falling towards the abyss in an almost irreversible position. Love is the pollen that first fertilizes life, while hate is a gas that interrupts it. The warning given in soft terms was severe, leaving no room for controversies or misunderstandings of any kind. The wise instructor also called on us to cultivate good ideas, to experience intimate peace through the elaboration of ennobling thoughts, stimulating us to mental correction, from whose source, the inner thoughts of our minds, come the bonds of slavery or the wings of the freedom we attach to our lives. Before leaving, he generously applied a long longitudinal healing bless on the patient, exhorting him to change the idea of evil in you, my friend, before anger overtakes you, and forget revenge before revenge leads you to a painful and regrettable situation. Jesus taught us that. When we were praying and we held something against someone, let us forgive. Pray and forgive in order to have health and peace. This phrase from Jesus is in Mark chapter 9, verse 25. Spiritual Author's Note. Dona Rosa, Mariana and Amália, standing beside us, praying very moved, allowed themselves to be dragged by the waves of momentary spirituality in the environment, bathed in a discreet weeping, as happened to us. The unexpected and beneficial exchange having ended, Petitinga without delay ended the relief work, and after saying goodbye, we left for our homes. I have a feeling, the friend informed me, that our Mateus will experience for his own benefit a priceless lesson that will invite him to take a long time to reflect on his destiny and the life that has passed him without major consequences. All those who say they are indifferent with regard to the problem of faith painfully cower before the realities of discarnation, accommodated to their responsibility as they live, when the flashes that herald the new day break out in them, or the first shadows of the crossing through the valley of death arrive, they struggle with anxiety, rave, make promises, negotiate. How can stand Dona Rosa, I asked, with such a heavy load over fragile shoulders as hers? As far as I am informed, he explained helpfully, by our spiritual benefactors, she was her careless mother in a past life. She kept accompanying him from the spiritual world, he who was living from fall to fall, with the heavy debts of the last existence after the escape to Belgium, which resulted in a heinous murder of the one who now raised his fratricidal hand against him. After the murder, in the previous life, he escaped justice, leaving the country before being arrested. After those events, she, pitying, begged the opportunity to be his wife, receiving in her arms as children the enemies of both, so them, by the example of patience, humility, and submission, could make amends to the crime of irresponsibility with him, and calling him to the observance of the duties he still patently neglects. As we can see, the exalted character that he shows, the continuous bad mood that he presents, attest to the imprisoned fiery spirit, with no possibility of revealing himself in all the strength of his primitive condition. She, however, progresses victoriously, and I really believe that her sacrifice and her fidelity to the postulates she embraces in Spiritism will end up gallantly overcoming her opponent, leading him to the rectitude of principles. It's worth considering that her merit sheet is equally appreciable. The maternal martyrdom that she has experienced in current situation consecrates her in this life, rehabilitating her from the neglect of an equivalent commitment in the past. Affectionately supported by her friends in the spiritual world, she acquires strength to compensate for the wear and tear in the first struggle of the tormented home, invaded by unhappy spiritual visitors who insist on making a home there, thanks to the other resident family members. In a way isolated, as much as the girls Mariana and Amalia, from the fluidic miasmas and the domestic nest, they have already created their own personal psychosphere, which exempts them from the aggressions of the less fortunate discarnate ones. As you can see, Mariana has proved to be a dedicated cooperator of our house, and soon will be devoted to the exercise of rescue mediumship, as we hope, acquiring valuable resources for the maintenance of health and peace. Amalia, fulfilling her duties as daughter and sister, is an excellent servant, earning her bread outside the home in modest and honorable work, through whose cooperation she helps the support of the other sisters. Divine Accounting also disposes of methods of beneficial correction of deposits in favor of those entitled in its books. Reflecting, I verified the legitimacy and correctness of the concepts issued when we said goodbye. The days went by observing us in the multiple activities to which we had joined, when Petitinga once again invited us to return to the Suarez family home, in response to Dona Rosa's distressed appeal. When we arrived there, the venerable lady received us steeped in suffering. The husband was almost dying. The doctor had recently left the home, informing her that the prognosis was disheartening. He had become hemiplegic, presenting the painful aspect of organic disaster. A whole side was paralyzed, and the agonizing throes that he was showing, half fainted, distressed his soul. The doctor himself said he was hopeless. Much more saddening was the distressing picture of the home, the suffering mother, with the immense burden of her sleepless nights and the superhuman efforts to support her family, was languishing under the harshness of the severe trials. Petitinga listened to her patiently, while in the dining room the wife and previously the careless mother recounted the near tragedy that had resulted in the no less damaging problem we now faced. Despite her humility and affection, she had been forced to admonish her daughter, Marta, who continued on the risky adventures of fetishism. Just before, when she arrived, late at night, her mother had reproached her for her behavior, warning her about the cooperation she should offer for the peace of the home and the recovery of the sick father, who was winning the first month of the aggression with excellent results, almost recovered. She asked her for spiritual help through prayer and a change of attitude towards the faith, so that the invisible messengers could renew the atmosphere of family life, changing the path of trials that everyone experienced as a disastrous consequence of past mistakes. She begged her not to go further into the tangled labyrinth of darkness where she was going. It was enough. Her daughter, possessed disrespectful, attacked her morally with strong and sour words, transforming what was merely a serene maternal invitation to reflection, dignity, and balance into a violent altercation. Furious, she tried to physically attack her mother, who was in front of her, failing to do so, thanks to the providential interference of Amalia and Mariana, who rushed to protect Dona Rosa. The negative forces of which she was usually an instrument erupted in an inopportune manner, and Mr. Mateus, suddenly awake, hearing the clamor and the commotion, jumped up from his bed hastily, marching in revolt, enraged, armed with a menacing axe. A few steps away, he staggered and fell to the ground. The scene was indescribable. The surgical wound, not yet completely healed, bled again, and taking immediate action, he was returned to the emergency room from the hospital. There, the resources compatible with the case were applied, and at the time he was in the oxygen tent, fighting for the survival of his body, diagnosed with cerebral embolism. The noble lady feared she would not bear the last pains. She was sick, and although she did not faint in faith, under no circumstances did she accuse herself of being tired, fearful, despondent. Overcome by convulsive crying, she supported herself in the fearless Spiritist belief, and under the fortifying aura of Spiritism, received from it the invigorating energy she needed. Gradually, she calmed down, recomposing herself. In addition to her husband, in this state of despair, Martha had retired to her room, possessed by her death hatred, refusing to live. Even knowing what had happened to her father, she reacted against him, continuing the tonic of revolt. After a few moments of reflection, Petitinga invited us to accompany him to Martha's room, where she was lingering, and with the moral authority that hallowed him, he greeted her. Though he wasn't reciprocated, she didn't answer him. His correct verb warned her. Martha, my daughter, the duty of solidarity induces me to look for you in the name of your afflicted mother and your dying father. We are not encouraged by any intention of provoking you, making injurious or objectionable considerations to the latest events that shook this home. We nurture the healthy desire to fight so that damage does not accumulate on the new damage in an avalanche of more desperate and worse graves. You know from personal experience that death is an entry into life, a re-examination of acts, a reunion with conscience, even when it lies numbed by ignorance or anesthetized by crime. We all know that life gives us what we need for our spiritual progress, and consequently, father, mother, family, and friends are important pieces indispensable for our evolution. How we behave related to them will result or not in new negative responsibilities that we will have to deal in the future. That's why, and for many other reasons, you cannot maintain the position in which you take refuge now, in which you have been sustaining yourself so far. The Soares' eldest daughter remained silent, emitting beams of dull, painful, restrained anger. Perfectly in control of the situation, Petitinga proposes, "If you allow us, daughter, we will apply magnetic healing blessings to you, over you, in order to help you with this difficult decision and support you in the tests that will come to you as a result of your stubbornness. We will pray together, we will find Jesus who will offer us a friendly arm to go forward, helping us to overcome the path of intimate reform under his divine support." Breaking the morbid silence, Martha roared, "Thank you for your interest. I'm feeling very well, and it would be better if my peace were not disturbed by your presence." Demonstrating his expertise in dealing with obsessors and obsessed, the president of the União Espírita Baiana very calmly replied, "We would leave you in the peace you refer to, if your attitudes were not factors of disturbance and disorder in this home. Here we are on behalf of your mother, who bears the burden of heavy suffering, exercising the role of mother and father so that the home does not suffer economic or moral misery. Where is your duty as a daughter, as a sister, who has received everything and gives nothing back? Since you don't help, you have no right to create difficulties. You are an adult and you have responsibilities towards life. Don't tarnish your conscience anymore, insisting on persevering in the mistake spontaneously accepted. Help us, daughter, to help you. I don't need you, I have my guides, mighty ones. They are the acting forces of nature, indestructible, rule the world, rigorous, know how to do and undo. And why not ask them for help, to be useful and noble, to help and support those who offered you the carnal clothing? Why didn't they hold you yesterday, preventing the deplorable outcome that your violent attitude generated? Because they are violent, avengers, and immediately achieve what tolerance and love do not achieve. Had I been up to me to solve the problems here, I would have solved them in a long time ago. Do you believe that I don't feel hurt, verifying that the forces I possess in my house are not worthy of consideration? I have clients who have achieved very good results with my resources, and my guides promised me either my people submit to them or they finish them. Such spirits, my daughter, are not guides. They are blind dragging the blind to the abyss in which all will fall. Plenty of ignorance, they linger in animality, demanding material retribution for self-delighting in the dense and coarse fluids from which they cannot free themselves. Hating themselves, they establish the climate of hatred, and revolted in the depths of being, spread rebellion, menacing to govern under the dark clouds of fear. Weak, they seek to divine in order to rule. Stating themselves to be fearful, they live in fear, fleeing from consciousness and descending more and more to greater shames in which they become entangled, unhappy. No, daughter, they are not powerful, nor indestructible, nor rigorous. They are primitives that vampirize you and feed on the mental plasma of those who, like you, fall as easy prey to their ruses and conspiracies. But you should know that they can do what you could never do. They free the victims of the obsession with force, ripping out their pursuers with the powers they possess. And you, what you do? And you, what do you do? Violence does not liberate and force does not convince. The victory of the power of force is illusory, because it generates the force of reaction that destroys it. What you say is liberation in case of obsession are invariably tricks that false benefactors use with the aggressors. Leaving the same vibratory tone, they combine a false liberation, giving the sensation of freedom to those who are in their tenacious influences, only to return later more violent, disturbed, and disturbing. Other times they invest with their own resources that they use, and hateful, they terrify the other persecutors, transferring the payment of the entangled in obsession to a more harmful and more difficult situation. Therefore, don't be fooled. The shadow over the shadow does not produce light. A drop of light overcomes darkness, yet the abundance of the second achieves nothing in relation to the first. Impiety produces nothing. The only efficient force is that which derives from moral reserves, that of the superior spirit, which produces the high-frequency vibratory emission which acts as a really powerful force capable of decisively influencing the sphere of causes and therefore, consequently, the field of effects. Remember Jesus before the demon-possessed gathering, the young man who suffered from seizures, the fevers of Pedro mother-in-law, the blind man from Jericho, the paralytic of Capernaum. Would it be necessary to go any further? Remember his strength in the face of the wicked, the false mighty of earth. Love is the bread of life, and as it is still scarce, humanity's hope staggers in the shadows of temporary violence, as the kingdom of love is soon to come. Let us now unite, my daughter, in the same ideal of service, and free your psychic forces from the constraints that plague you, offering them to Jesus. While there is still time, initiating a new life for your own benefit. Do not forget, at this moment, that your dying parent between life and death, or as we could also say between death and new life, in part, may leave you with heavy shadows of remorse, late regret, unproductive, disquieting. Now is the time. It's time to rehabilitate yourself. Get out of the night and head for the day. Pray and immerse yourself in comfort. Do not transfer your moment of happiness. We will invite your mother to accompany us in prayer and start, even now, your resurrection, your spiritual rebirth. The power of arguments and the moral strength of the old counseling medium calmed the tormented woman, and at the signal we set out to look for Dona Rosa, who was waiting outside, being introduced into the room where we were. Asked for prayer, I tried to raise myself to the Lord and beseech Him with the help needed. Meanwhile, the apostle of spiritual charity ministered fluidic and magnetic resources in the compromised sensitive. After the careful spiritual operation, she got up and visibly moved, thanked him, committing to visit her father and mediate on the new guidelines that faced her in those painful circumstances. The power of prayer. When men understand and really use the resources of prayer, the scenarios of moral life on earth will change greatly. Having fulfilled our duties at the home of Soares, we went to the hospital to visit Mr. Mateus, considering that the visits were allowed in that day. Although he was at complete rest, in a separate chamber, Petitinga obtained permission from the doctor on duty, who was a friend of him, to pray in silence at the patient's bedside. As the previous doctor, friend of the family, had described, the condition of Mariana's father was deplorable. Breathing broken by painful grimaces, the marks of paralysis on one side of the body denoted the seriousness of the problem. Although saddened, Petitinga, calm, withdrew in prayer, whereupon we followed him silently. After a few minutes, we left, faithful to our commitment to avoid disturbing the sick man. In the street, the admirable sensitive explained us that he had noticed the presence of Saturnino and of Brother Glaucus, who were there supporting the patient and assisting him, having registered in his intuition that he would gradually recover over time. That was a sublime resource that the divine law had used to help the temperamental welder in building his own eternal happiness. There is no way to doubt divine providence. Next chapter, the Comforting Christ. If you like the video, please leave us your like, share the video with your friends, leave us your comments if you want, and please subscribe to help us to grow. Thank you very much.